All right. Hello, NAGDA members. My name is Michaela O'Connor. I'm a senior consultant and head of defined contribution at RVK. I'm thrilled to be moderating today's post-election webinar, What's Ahead for Public DC Plans in 2021. So just a few things before we get started. We are recording this presentation and it will be emailed to all attendees as well as posted on the website soon after we finish here today. You will be muted for the duration of the webinar, but please submit questions for the speakers throughout the presentation in the Q&A box found in the menu at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will only be visible to me and the speakers, so please feel free to send those at any time and we'll get to them at the end of or hopefully get to them at the end of the webinar. Lastly, we also have a chat feature open, which you may use to chat with your fellow attendees during the presentation if you so choose so. So we are going to kick off today's webinar with messages for NAGDA from Senators Rob Portman from Ohio and Ben Cardin from Maryland. Both senators have been really good friends of NAGDA over the years. They've been strong advocates for improving the US retirement system and sponsoring important bipartisan legislation over the years. We will then dive into a discussion on the current political landscape, recent retirement bills, NAGDA's legislative priorities, as well as the fiscal crisis impacting governments. And then lastly, any other initiatives that may impact public DC plan sponsors and participants. And then we will save some time, as I mentioned, for Q&A at the end. So joining me today for this discussion is an esteemed group of panelists, including Reagan Anderson, Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at Capital Group, Paul Beddoe, Government Affairs Director for NAGDA, Andy Blocker, Head of US Government Affairs at Invesco, and then Janine Raymond, Director of Federal Relations for the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, or NASRA. So welcome all, and thank you for being here. So let's hear from Senators Portman and Cardin.
Hello, I'm Senator Ben Cardin, and I'm honored to be joining you for the National Association of Government Defined Contribution Administrators webinar. I wish we could be together in person, but I am pleased to be joining you on video today. The work you do is so important, and as millions of Americans begin to retire in the coming years, ensuring that they can do so with dignity is more important than ever. I am pleased that we worked together to pass my bipartisan resolution in the Senate to designate October as National Retirement Security Month. We can and must do more to raise awareness of the importance of retirement security. As we begin to look at the coming Congress, I am confident that we will have opportunities to build on our recent legislative victories. Last year, with your help, Congress enacted the Secure Act to make needed improvements to our retirement savings system. Next Congress, I am looking forward to continuing working with Senator Portman to enact the Retirement Security and Savings Act. I want to thank you for your endorsement of this legislation. This legislation is a set of common sense solutions that will help Americans save more, create more access to retirement plans, promote lifetime income solutions, strengthen the retirement system, and ensure Americans can achieve the post-work financial stability they desire. More specifically, the Retirement Security and Savings Act will help you all with the challenges you face in helping frontline state and local government workers strengthen their retirement savings. It is time for these improvements to be made to the retirement system. Retirement security has been and continues to be one of the most bipartisan issues in Congress. With recent bills introduced in the House that overlap with the Retirement Security and Savings Act, we have a real chance to continue the momentum and enact meaningful retirement security legislation next year. We are once again going to need your help and advocacy to make sure our colleagues understand how important these changes are and why they should join our cause to get the next set of reforms enacted into law. I look forward to getting a chance to connect with you all in person soon, and I hope we can have your help to enact the Retirement Security and Savings Act. Thank you, and I wish you the best during these trying times.
Hi, I'm U.S. Senator Rob Portman. Thanks to the National Association of Government-Defined Contribution Administrators for inviting me and my friend Ben Cardin to speak with you all about a bipartisan solution we're working on to help more Americans save for retirement. I've been proud to work with Ben over the years on landmark bills that have reformed our retirement system to help more people grow their retirement nest eggs. However, as you all know, we continue to see certain groups with systemic lack of savings or access to plans, which we're going to try to address with our new Retirement Security and Savings Act, or Portman Cardin. Portman Cardin contains dozens of provisions designed to help more Americans achieve a safe and secure retirement, that peace of mind in retirement. I know for your group, a key goal is ensuring that retirement age Americans have the flexibility to save up more for retirement if they so choose. Our bill will help by allowing folks who are already retirement age to choose to save longer for retirement by raising what's called the required minimum distribution age from 72 up to 75. And for people with less than $100,000 in their retirement account, our bill removes this RMD, this required minimum distribution, entirely. This will allow people like my dad, who worked well into his 70s, to better build a nest egg on their own schedule. Portman Cardin includes other provisions that I know are a priority for all of you. Our bill makes it easier for plans you administer to invest in collective investment trusts. This would expand critical options for savings for retirement for members you care about. These are the same lower-cost investments used by so many other plans. Portman Cardin also makes it easier for employees to roll assets, whether inherited from a non-spouse or taking their own non-Roth plans, and putting them to work in their employer's plan. This will help your members to take advantage of economies of scale and generate greater returns for their accounts. Our bill also makes other important reforms to help people gain access to retirement accounts. First, it will help low-income and part-time workers save more for retirement by expanding the Savers Credit to help more low-income Americans increase their retirement savings and make it directly refundable into a retirement account. It also increases the credit amount available for many low-income savers and requires employers to allow part-time workers who've completed 2 years of service to participate in a 401k plan. That will cover a lot more people. And second, it helps near retirees to quickly build up their nest eggs by increasing catch-up retirement plan contributions after age 60. So the limits go up after age 60, another catch-up, letting workers save more for their retirement in less time, and encourage employers to make larger contributions to their employees' retirement funds through both tax credits and regulatory improvements. There have been some promising developments in this space lately with the new and bipartisan Neil Brady Secure 2.0 bill in the House of Representatives. It was introduced in the House recently by the chair of the Ways and Means Committee and the ranking Republican. This would build on last year's Secure Act and includes a lot of the Portman Cardin provisions we just talked about, so there's a lot of overlap between the two. We're also hoping to have a hearing in the Finance Subcommittee on Pensions that I chair during the lame duck session of Congress to highlight Portman Cardin and other bipartisan solutions on the defined contribution side. I'm hopeful this hearing can help pave the way for bipartisan action on this issue early in the next Congress, and I hope everyone in attendance today will consider tuning in to that hearing and helping us to get this done. Thanks for all you do to help more Americans achieve a financially secure retirement. I'll continue to work with my bipartisan colleagues to fight for important legislation to reform our retirement system and make it easier for people to save, and make your important work easier too. Thanks for what you do. Good luck.
Well, I want to say on behalf of NAGDA, we'd like to thank, Senators Portman and Cardin for their great messages, as well as being huge supporters of the public sector DC plans. With that, why don't we dive into some discussion? Now, both Senators Portman and Cardin seem to suggest that there is an opportunity for additional retirement legislation in the upcoming Congress, as this topic tends to and has been a bipartisan issue. So, Andy and Reagan, what are your thoughts on this? And can you speak to the political landscape as well as the potential environment in Congress over the next couple of years? And where does retirement fall compared to, say, other issues that Congress will be addressing? Andy, maybe let's start with you.
Sure, great to be with you. Thank you. So I guess start from the top. I think if we're going to do a quick recap from the election, it was clear that the American people wanted to move on from Donald Trump, but at the same time did not trust Democrats to hold all the reins of power. So we have split government, at least for now, and most likely if I were going to bet today. So with the Republicans maintaining the control in the Senate, Democrats getting control of the presidency and maintaining control, with slim control of the House, this is going to be a very interesting environment. So let's start with what will not happen. So what will not happen is, if you start from the top, no Green New Deal, no expansion of Obamacare, no financial transaction tax, no cap gains increase, no corporate tax increase, no individual tax increase, at least what they were talking about in the Biden proposals. So all that's off the table. But when you start talking about what will happen, even though there's a lot of conversation, the big conversation will be COVID, economy, infrastructure. All those things aren't certain. The one thing that's actually bipartisan and that has a really good chance is retirement reform. We have a bipartisan bill in the House, we have a bipartisan bill in the Senate. Just heard from those two senators. So that's right front and center. But my biggest fear is that even though they're bipartisan, it's kind of because they're bipartisan, because they're low-hanging fruit, do they get caught up in the politics of people wanting to make statements? So let's just say, for instance, if Republicans contain control of the Senate, you put this on the floor, people might want to make political statements and attach things to it. So that's my only concern. I think at some point this new Secure 2.0 is going to become law, but it may be painful and take a lot longer than it should. And then if you look at Democrats, if they're in control, they might not want to give up floor time because they might have judges they want to nominate. They want to have other things they want to do. So there's a lot of different things. So while we think it'll happen, and it should, I mean, the Secure Act 1.0 took way too long because of those same reasons.
So, hi, it's nice to be with you. Just picking up on a few of the things that Andy said. Obviously, I agree with so much there. I mean, I think that the thing to highlight, and I'm going to admit up front, I grew up in Ohio, so I'm a huge Rob Portman fan. But, his commitment to maintaining a bipartisan product on retirement security is so genuine. And I think that is really important. And I think that when you're looking at the makeup of the Senate and the Congress, to Andy's point, the margins are really narrow. So it is going to be tough to get 60 votes on legislation passing through the Senate. But if there's anything that I've learned in doing this for almost 20 years, it's that sometimes in divided government is when things really can happen. The Biden administration is going to come in, and it's a question mark, in terms of those Georgia Senate races that we're all paying such close attention to, how quickly he'll be able to get his team in place. And so even if you hear the media reporting that, what we'll see in Washington over the next 2 years is going to be largely regulatory, not legislative in a divided government. He's got to get those regulators in place, and he's going to have to work with the Senate to be able to get that done. So you're seeing, the names of people being nominated to these various positions that will have influence over, the regulations and the rules, but also provide thoughts on our retirement package, right? Like waiting to see who the team is at Treasury and their thoughts on a retirement package. I feel pretty confident that if there is a short list, and Andy ran through kind of campaign platform, and it will have to be modified, absolutely, particularly these first 2 years. But if you created a short list of things that can get done in divided government, I would put retirement legislation at the top. Andy and I have something in common other than where we currently are today. We both have worked at the New York Stock Exchange in our previous lives. And, when I was there years ago, back in 2011, I started a project, and it was divided government that we were able to get a piece of legislation signed by President Obama. Republicans controlled the House, Democrats controlled the Senate, but we were able to build that coalition and get it done. And it was to help companies reduce some of the burdens of going public. And so it was about capital raising, and it felt a lot like retirement security, right? Where there's a lot of interest. It's a kitchen table issue. I think that there's also going to be a commitment to helping people rebuild savings once we get past the pandemic, and that could drive these conversations. And I will also say that I think that there couldn't probably be a better Democrat leading the House Ways and Means Committee than Richie Neal and his commitment to bipartisan retirement security. And, I know Senator Portman shared with a group of us after the midterms, the first meeting he took after the midterm election where Democrats took the House was he walked across the Capitol and sat down with Richie Neal. And that was more important to him than anything else, because he wanted to have that conversation right away about retirement legislation. And there's so much there, but his comments were just so genuine. And I don't underestimate Senators Portman and Cardin in terms of continuing to build that bipartisan spirit. And I also think that, if there's different scenarios, ways to think about this, but I think the leadership at the Senate Finance Committee, regardless of whether it's a Democrat or Republican, is going to absolutely entrust those two to lead the charge on this.
Thank you, Andy and Reagan, for kicking us off here. Really good comments. Maybe what we can do now is take a deeper dive into some of the provisions being proposed in both the Senate and the House. Both Senators Portman and Cardin mentioned that their bill, the Retirement Security and Savings Act, includes many overlapping provisions to the recent retirement legislation introduced by Richard Neal and Kevin Brady in their Securing a Strong Retirement Act of 2020. So, Paul, between these two bills, there are a number of NAGDA priorities and NAGDA endorsed provisions. Maybe can you talk about why certain provisions are endorsed by NAGDA, as well as their potential impact to participants and plan sponsors within the public DC space?
Absolutely. But before I get to that, I think it would be worth mentioning that the hearing that Senator Portman foretold in his recorded remarks actually happened this morning. This morning, there was a hearing in the Senate Finance Committee subcommittee on Social Security and pensions, and it was a hearing that NAGDA was invited to testify along with Nationwide and a financial advisor from Edward Jones and a principal from the Groom Law Group. Really good hearing, very constructive. A lot of the themes that Andy and Reagan mentioned were definitely were being aired in that hearing. There's an interest in definitely in being bipartisan, building a record for congressional record for moving legislation forward. They dived into some of the details of some of the bills, and there was also a concern about the impact of the pandemic on people's ability to save and what needs to happen to kind of help people dig out of any holes that they may have dug themselves into because of the financial crisis that has gone along with the economic crisis that's gone along with the public health crisis. So a lot of really important themes were being aired, and by and large, it was a very bipartisan hearing. I'd also note that NAGDA President Josh Luskin did a great job. He kept his testimony under 5 minutes, just as coached, so I was very proud of him. And he fielded some really tough questions and even some kind of out of left field questions with aplomb and grace. I couldn't have been, I think NAGDA should be very proud of how Josh did. And if you're interested in watching the hearing, if you have a couple hours at some point down the road, you can go onto the Senate Finance Committee website, and they have a hearings page, and there's a link that will be there for you to catch up on that if you'd like. But back to your original question, McKaylee, and that was some of the provisions that were in that are in Portman Cardin and also in the Neil Brady bill. And really, I have to say that all 6 of NAGDA's formally adopted by the board legislative priorities are included in the Portman Cardin bill. And just for members who may be logged into this that don't know, we do have a kind of a member-driven policy development process. We put out, you will have noticed emails in November where we put out a call to members to submit ideas for federal policy changes. And then the board, the legislative committee reviews those. We're also consulting with some of our sister organizations to get sort of a sense of what they're working on and identify things that we might be able to work on together. And then, and then those will go to the board, and the board will then formally convey them to Congress early next year as our priority list. And we'll advocate for them during the course of the year. And so we have been successful on the Senate side with getting all 6 of our issues sort of incorporated into the Portman Cardin bill. And then we worked really hard over the past year with the Ways and Means Committee, and we're delighted in October to see that 3 of our issues were included in Ways and Means. Carly, if you want to put up that slide, it kind of shows what the issues are. So you can see NAGDA's key legislative priorities. First of all, expanding 403B investment options to include CITs. And Josh was able to spend a good deal of time today teasing that out with members of the committee, explaining the value of the lower cost, lower fee structure for CITs that will enable public school teachers and other education workers, public hospital workers to enjoy the same kind of investment options that their colleagues in other DC plans can have, whether it's for 401ks in the private sector or 457s or 401as in the government sector. The second one is to permit non-spousal beneficiaries to roll their inherited IRA assets into their workplace plan. And Josh was also able to spend some good time on that and on number 4, talking about rolling Roth assets into their workplace plan. And the whole point is to take advantage of the economies of scale in the workplace plan to keep fees low and allow better, faster accrual of assets, as opposed to being in a retail IRA. Eliminating the 457 first day of the month rule is one that is in both the Portman Cardin and the Neil Brady bill. This is has been a priority of NAGDA. I understand from speaking to my predecessor literally for years. So if we could actually knock this out, that in itself would be a huge win for NAGDA. This is something that just goes back to the old days of paper record keeping, and it doesn't make sense in the modern environment. And then number 5, exempting Roth contributions in DC plan from RMD rules. Senator Portman actually was asking Josh about this, and we were able to have that discussion in the Q&A time with him. Just it doesn't make sense for after-tax Roth assets to be subject to this IRA, to the RMD rules, when Roth assets in a Roth IRA are not subject to RMD. You've already paid the taxes on those. And then finally, allowing participants who wish to make a qualified charitable distribution from their plan, just like they would be able to if they were in an IRA. So all 6 in Portman Cardin, 3 in Neil Brady, and I think we're feeling pretty good about the commitment of our key champions to moving forward. But as Andy and Reagan cautioned, it's not going to be a smooth sailing, and it's not going to just land in our laps. We're going to have to work for it.
Well, thank you, Paul. Definitely would be exciting to get these actually into legislation and passed this next year, these next couple of years. A lot of those priorities would really have an impact, not only on administration, but just on participant outcomes in general. Let's maybe pivot to an issue that we haven't talked a lot about yet, and that is the fiscal crisis impacting governments from the COVID-19 health crisis right now. Janine, maybe can you talk about what state and local governments are facing and the potential impacts to public sector DB plans? And maybe also touch on certain narratives that have been circulating and any misinformation that would benefit the audience from clarification. You're, I think, still on mute. You want to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. It's a pleasure always to work with NAGDA. We work a lot together in Washington, D.C. on issues affecting DB and DC plans. I would say that the biggest issue right now is with regard to the narrative, I'll start there, is that there's a lot of confusion between the need for aid to state and local governments themselves to address increased expenditures related to COVID-19 and budget shortfalls related to the economic shutdown from COVID-19. Also, private sector pension plans asking for funding relief. Some in the corporate sector, relief from the federal funding rules for those defined benefit plans, and then multi-employer union plans, which are also in the private sector that are facing, some are facing insolvency, and there's been a multi-year effort to try to find some relief for those plans and the federal insurance backstop for them. So, you've got pension issues in the private sector, and you've got state and local aid relating to the COVID-19. And that's sometimes been confused with, state and local pension plans and COVID-19. From our analysis, kind of early on in the pandemic, is that pretty early on, most state and local pension plans had business continuity plans that allowed them to move remotely pretty quickly and seamlessly. They were able to get, monthly contributions out the door on time and in full. While the markets were pretty volatile at the beginning, they fully recovered. So we really haven't seen, a large, impact akin to what we saw back in the Great Recession, where you saw very large economic impacts on not just the plan sponsors, but also, the plan assets themselves. So most public pension plans are expected to have fairly stable funding for 2020. So the bigger concern is really about their plan sponsors and the increased costs and reduced revenues that they're facing. But despite that, I think the one big impediment right now, there's a bill that currently being worked on, the next economic relief bill. Aid to state and local governments is a key component. And the number one reason used to block aid to state and local governments is that concerns that they might use that money to pay off their pension liabilities. And most state and local governments are going to use it for immediate fiscal needs, not long-term fiscal programs like a state or local pension. But it has been a narrative that's out there. We've really tried to attempt to kind of separate these issues, but a lot of confusion on Capitol Hill at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't we move a little bit beyond Congress? What are the likely priorities of a Biden administration in the retirement policy space over the next couple of years? Maybe we can discuss any agendas at the Department of Treasury, IRS, Department of Labor, the SEC. Anybody have any thoughts on what we may see out of these agencies? I don't know, Andy and Reagan, if you want to start, and then we can go around.
Sure, I'll start. I think first, it depends on, I'll start with Department of Labor. I'll just say, depending on who Biden selects, that can determine who's the favorite child. So sorry, retirement, you may not be the favorite child. It may be the unions and getting consensus around helping them organize better. It might be OSHA, workers' rights, independent contractor rule, those types of things, especially anything that's related to COVID. So, but if we go to retirement space, both of the DOL and SEC, you've seen a lot of activity, even though it might not be right in your zone, but regulation best interest is going to be a hot topic, as well as Department of Labor fiduciary. Now, they're not going to redo regulation best interest. That would be very difficult, but they can definitely impact it on any guidance that they give, being more stringent in their enforcement. And you can look at that at the beginning, and then they may think, oh, let's try to open it up. But I don't think at the SEC, I think it's going to be tough to open up. But on the Department of Labor side, which is kind of the back door, that back door might not be closed by the time this administration is over. So there's a rule pending at OMB that it's in the middle of the process. So who knows if it gets done, basically saying, hey, if you're complying with Reg BI, don't worry about the Department of Labor. But if that doesn't get through, that's a whole big door that they're going to drive a Mack truck through. And if they might just rewrite that, they might do a new rule. They might just go with the 5-part test. So that's there. But coming to this space, I'd say that the biggest concern is the unknown. I mean, there's this sort of pseudo proposal out there that's going to move from deferral of taxes for defined contribution to a credit system. And part of the thought is that you're going to equalize the tax benefits among those who are on the lower end versus those of the upper end. We really don't know, though. I mean, all we have is a few words on a page, but that is a major sea change in the way we're looking at this. I think that, Reagan mentioned Congressman Neal. I don't think he'd be in favor of it if he wants to get other things done. I just don't think it's going to be something, that upending of our system that we've relied on for so long. It's not going to incentivize savings. It's going to create confusion, and then you're going to have to explain a whole new system to people. So that's where I think that. So maybe Reagan has some thoughts on other parts of the administration.
Yeah, I mean, so Andy hinted at, what we don't know is what the list of priorities looks like for the Biden administration. What we do know is that they can use the Congressional Review Act to undo any regulation that wasn't finalized within 60 legislative days of the end of the current administration. And, the DOL, it kind of came to life over the summer. We saw their ESG proposal, we saw their proxy voting proposal, so after, and certainly the fiduciary rule, after what was kind of a slow start for Eugene Scalia, it really picked up over the summer. And, one thing to keep in mind about these regulatory agencies, and I know our friends at NAGDCA know this, but it's the career staff who carry over from administration to administration that really carry the ball and move these projects forward. I mean, it's exactly what we dealt with on Reg BI at the, at not only at the SEC, but particularly at the Department of Labor. There was one staffer in particular who made that her priority. And when the SEC didn't move on it, she did, right? And so that's where we ended up with the Obama administration's fiduciary role. So yeah, I think that there's a good, fair question about what President-elect Biden wants to do in terms of which rules he pulls back through CRA, because it's not a very easy process. You have to have every single Democrat support of voting on that in the Senate, which maybe they'll have. But there's a lot there. And, and I think coming into this, I had mentioned to his people, getting his nominees confirmed, I think is going to be top priority. And you're already seeing some controversy in the press. And then for Biden, I think one of the biggest changes that those of us who do this day-to-day DC work was that you couldn't look at President Trump's team and conclude where he was going to come out on policy, right? Because he was really independent. A lot of words to describe him, but he kind of made up his own mind on things. And we expect the exact opposite from President-elect Joe Biden. He's going to be staff-driven. Personnel will be policy in his administration, not that it isn't in others, but particularly in this one. So we're watching very cautiously. I think the ESG component, I mentioned it at the DOL rule, even if I would suspect it's a priority for the Biden administration to really think about how investment strategies can promote environmental, social, and governance priorities, right? And this is one of those pendulums that has swung, politically back and forth. And unfortunately, I agree with Andy that, on Reg BI, the SEC just can't undo it, but I think through enforcement, they could probably really shape the direction of the fiduciary rule going forward. The last point I want to make is just thinking longer term, and Andy talked a little bit about tax implications. I think that we have lived now, it's hard to believe, but 9 months in this global pandemic where Congress has responded in a bipartisan way to the needs facing the country, right? So a $3 trillion series of bills came together, very, very quickly, right? And with a very small amount of people who were able to actually sit around a table and negotiate that. The kind of attitude right now, and we're, as was mentioned, we're seeing it as they try so desperately to work through a compromise on another COVID response, is that we haven't been worried about paying for anything, right? We are just allocating these federal funds, but that's going to change, and that's going to have to change in a really big way. And there's enough people who are on both sides of the aisle. I mean, this is a bipartisan issue, and I think back to when Trump was elected and we started immediately working on that tax reform bill. It was Republicans who wanted to move us to a Roth system of saving, right? They were looking for revenue. They were saying, if you are putting, over $2,700, $2,800 a year into your retirement savings account, that should be Roth. Do you need, and it was a very senior policy advisors in the Trump administration that he did not listen to, including Gary Cohen at the time, saying, what is the public policy justification for someone at either over a certain income threshold or over a certain annual or lifetime savings amount, that the tax code, that they need that incentive, right? They're going to, if they want to save for retirement, they're going to save for retirement. And by the way, we can raise a ton of money if we take away that upfront tax credit. So I think, and then the last point I'll make, because I've taken too much time, I'm sure, is we're already thinking about, the second half of this Biden administration, because the Senate map is very challenging for Republicans again. And so we could be in a scenario where Congress completely flips and Republicans take the House and Democrats take the Senate. What does it look like as we try to tackle some of these national debt and deficit issues? Because this era of let's just throw money at the problem, and I'm not saying it hasn't been the right approach, but the spending has not been checked at all as we've had to grapple with this awful pandemic. But that's going to change going forward. And it's our industry, it's our space that's often on that, I hate to say it, but that list of revenue raisers, top to bottom. So we're thinking about that a lot at Cap Group, and thinking long term about, as a large investor, what do cap gains and dividends rates look like longer term, right? Like Andy said, which I totally agree with, he's not going to be able to come in day one. He never really would have been able to come in day one and raise corporate and individual rates. But the conversation's already shifting to, when we come out on the other side of this COVID, we are going to have to get our spending in check, and they're going to be looking to industries like ours to help pay the tab, frankly.
Thank you, Reagan and Andy. Any other comments from you all before I move on?
I would just add, I would echo those same comments. We worry about revenue raisers. And in addition to all those that have mentioned, maybe not right away, but, also FTT down the road, financial transaction tax, and that cuts across all retirement savings plans, all savings plans in general. The other that came up in the 2017 bill was subjecting public plans to the unrelated business income tax. So that was one. And then removing the special rules for governmental plans, not just UBIT, but also special catch-up contributions, the 10% penalty. Although, you guys did great work, and also that was scored as a revenue loser. So hopefully that one will kind of fall by the wayside. But I think revenue raisers, they always look to retirement savings tax preferences and other benefit tax preferences when they look to raise revenue, because that's where the money is.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Janine. So Reagan, you briefly talked about, the DOL guidance on ESG. Is there anything that, public DC plan sponsors should be aware of regarding the recent DOL guidance on ESG as well as proxy voting? Anything that you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I think we don't know yet, and I'm sorry that that's not a more definitive answer, but we just don't know what that priority list looks like. I mean, I think it's safe to assume that a Biden administration is going to undo the DOL ESG proposal because they can, right? And they would want to go in a completely different direction. And this is one of those political footballs that, depending on who's in the White House, you know, the pendulum swings back and forth. Now, to the points that have been made, it will be very time consuming to try to get things turned around. You know, and like we saw when Trump was elected, I mean, I think it was February, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was February that he signed the executive order to halt the Department of Labor's work on the Obama fiduciary rule, because it was a priority, right? And it was something that fell within the CRA that he was able to do. So I don't think we know yet. It's something that we're paying very close attention to. We actually were pretty actively engaged in the advocacy on the current proposal because we had some concerns with it. And we've questioned where's that going to fall on the list? I mean, when you talk to the Biden transition team and the advisors, they're not really getting beyond the COVID, kind of like Andy said, right? So every conversation that we're having with those who are, you know, an agency head or really involved in the policy and building the foundation for the platform, you know, the real nitty gritty, it's how does this relate to COVID? Is this a 6, 9, or 12-month issue? And to be really candid, I mean, it's going to have to be people like, you know, Portman and Cardin and those who really care on the Hill that push, because I think our industry is just not at the top of Biden's list right now. There's just so many other pressing issues.
Right. Well, I do want to let the audience know that we will start taking your questions here very shortly. Just as a reminder, you can submit questions through the Q&A box found in the bottom of the menu. Again, we're the only ones who will be able to see them, and then we'll try to incorporate them into the session. I guess maybe before we get into Q&A, I would be interested, and I'm sure the audience would as well, what typically happens during the lame duck session, right? What has been going on that you all know about and can share at this point? Or maybe there's nothing going on, I don't know.
Why are we talking about typical? Does anything about this lame duck seem typical?
No.
Look, I mean, so right now what's going on is they're trying to fund the government, make sure the government doesn't shut down. It expires December 11th. I think they're voting today or tomorrow to extend it till next week in the House, and they'll do it in the Senate. They're working to pass NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, which has passed for 59 straight years on time. It is the defense of our country. That's a good thing. So I think they're going to do that. And then it's COVID-19, whether that gets attached to the appropriate bill. And Reagan talked about that. So there's talk of, you know, I think I was on a call with Congressman Neal yesterday, and he was talking about, and you know, we need to attach extenders and tax. And I'm like, I mean, I don't buy into all that. I mean, I think obviously Chairman of Ways and Means wants to add a lot of stuff to different things and get his stuff done. But I guess if you get a deal done, you can start thinking about that first. But I think getting a COVID-19 is going to be really tough. I think the politics are finally lining up. I think there's enough pressure, but they still got to cut the deal. So, I don't know. I think normally you would try to clear the decks for the next administration and just get going. But this is such a contentious, and we're still contending on the presidential election. So maybe after December 14th, that goes away after electoral college votes, but there's nothing normal about this. Reagan, do you got any thoughts? I'd love to hear what you have to say.
So I actually had a great opportunity to chat with a Republican senator from the leadership team right before this call. And he puts the COVID package at over 50%. He's actually an active negotiator, and I took that as a positive. He said the biggest thing that's changed since they've been back this week is that everybody wants a bill. Everybody wants to get a deal. And, you know, I think the thing that's important to remember is, and I'm sure Andy listened to these conversations as well, but, you know, the members of Congress that I've continued to listen to and trust were the ones who said back in April, we had no idea what we're doing. We had no appreciation for the significance, the severity, the impact on our schools and our communities and the longevity of this thing, right? Like 10 million people still unemployed, even with all the resources that we put into communities and businesses. You know, and then as the months went on, and I don't want to make this all about COVID, but I think it's important to understand that bipartisanship broke down when, you know, the fact that this series of bills to combat this came together so quickly, there were some really fatal flaws, right? Some big mistakes that were costing money. So for fiscally conservative members of Congress, they really did dig their heels in the sand and say, well, you know what, no. If 80% of Americans who were at that point receiving federal aid were making more money than they did prior to COVID, that's a problem, particularly if we have over 5 million jobs open in America. And at that point in July, there were. And so, you know, the issues were really significant. And so I thought, though, that in the fall and through the election, and you had to take the election spin off of a lot of it, but even on the back of an envelope, I thought that there was about $1 trillion where there was bipartisan support, right? Whether it's the amount going to cities and states, to schools, to rural broadband, hospitals. I mean, you can get there. And I hate to sound like a DC cynicist, but I think it's all going to come down to what impact does a COVID package have on those Georgia Senate races. Mitch McConnell wants to be the Senate Republican leader. He wants to see his committee chairmen maintain their chairmanships. So I genuinely think that if that helps tip the scale, and I've been watching Twitter, I know we all love to hate it, but you know, both candidates, you know, David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler are basically begging for a COVID package to help their state. So, you know, I do think it comes down to that, and then it becomes a political question. But I think the tone has shifted, and I think that keeping them here an extra week, so, you know, instead of leaving on the end of this week, leaving, you know, next week, that helps the negotiation process. I'll throw one other thought out there, just because it's unprecedented for us to think about, but you know, the first 100 days of the Biden administration starts with Congress being sworn in. And, you know, they're having very real challenges figuring out how they're going to do that, right? There are 20 some members of the House who have not physically been in Washington since March. So there's so much that's going to require bipartisan agreement just to get the Congress started and get people sworn in, and then get through the inauguration process, which, you know, we know is going to look a lot different than it has obviously in years past. But so it's not just the lame duck, it's then how do we get through the first 100 days knowing we're still going to be combating, you know, this really dangerous pandemic.
Great, thank you guys both. One question that came up, and I think really this is for you, Paul. Can you speak to whether there are additional items coming up on the NAGDA priorities list for 2021, or items that are being discussed at the board level?
Absolutely. We actively solicit ideas. So if you have thoughts about ways that to improve the operation of plans or outcomes for your participants, please send them in. In fact, we're going to put a link to the policy proposal submission form into the chat, along with I think a link to the Senate Finance hearing, so that you should, you know, if you have ideas, please do send them in. We are optimistic and hopeful that we could completely clear the deck of all of NAGDA's priorities, and then I'm going to need something else to work on. So please help us put some good new ideas into the pipeline.
Perfect. Another question here regarding ESG. So even if Biden reverses the DOL ruling on ESG investing, specifically focusing on the tiebreaker rule, do you feel that government plans can use these types of investments within their plans, even if we more than likely would never have two exact funds in the menu? So I think really the question is, you know, despite this rule, how do you think public DC plans can think about ESG, and how should they look at evaluating ESGs within the investment menu? opinion. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, the current way the rule is written, it makes it tough. I mean, it's if it has to have to show a pecuniary relationship between the ESG, the fact that it's actually helping, and when it isn't, you have to explain it. So it puts you through some hoops. And I do think that the Biden administration is going to want to go after this, and even though it's going to take some time. Just let's assume that Democrats don't win 2 seats in Georgia. They aren't able to use the CRA, and they can't just throw it away. They're going to probably want to take the time to amend it or do something, because it's totally contrary to every belief on the Democratic side of the aisle. So, and it's gonna. I think it kind of. Depending, then what they could do is talk about how they're not going to enforce it, or they're not going to have scrutiny or oversight over the rule. But still, it's on the books, and so it's doing what it's meant to do. Even though it was softened in the somewhat in the comment process, it still is a deterrent to you investing in ESG. I don't know, Reagan, you have different thoughts, or?
No, I agree with that, Andy. I think you covered it.
Yeah.
Maybe, well, for all of you guys, with regard to these kind of bipartisan bills, has there been any known targeted lobbying against any of the specifics aspects of these? You know, are there controversial items that won't likely get bipartisan support?
How do you disagree with Portman and Cardin? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that one of the sort of, kind of to Reagan's point in her introductory comments, the kind of very savvy and very well-respected leadership that Senator Portman and Senator Cardin enjoy within, across the aisle and within their caucuses, and really, I think also with Chairman Neal and Ranking Member Brady. They disagree on almost everything, but they work very collaboratively on retirement. And the effort to put together, the controversy happens before the package is put together. They vet these ideas with stakeholders, and it's an extensive process. I know from having worked with them to try to get provisions in, they'll share what they can share, but they're keeping it really close to their vest, and they're doling out little scraps of information to people who might have concerns. And it's a very extensive, stakeholder inclusive, careful, measured process to put together a package. So when they put it out on the street, responses typically are muted. Nobody wants to be the proverbial whatever in the punch bowl. Everyone wants to play nice. Everyone wants their provisions to be in the package, and they don't want to rock the boat. Having said that, I think there are little pockets of concern out there about, from different sectors, but I don't think you're going to see a full-on, head-on kamikaze mission to take down the bill or even parts of the bill. If anything, I and it's interesting, and this is maybe recklessly opining, but I think one of the ways I've seen Senator Portman and Cardin operate is by actually seeming like they're anticipating what concerns could be on the other side, rather than ramming through their own perspective. And so, we'll see sensitivity on the Portman side about wanting to make sure that there's plenty of focus in the bill on lower income and middle income people, not just benefits for the upper income, and so on and so forth. So I don't see a lot of opposition. I don't see storm clouds from any of the policy or from stakeholder groups. It's probably going to be like what Andy and Reagan were saying. It's going to be external issues that would bog it down, as opposed to anything to do with the bill itself. Would be my take.
Yeah, I think you're right. Can I just say something, Reagan? Or did you? Okay. So if you have a death wish and you do not want to get anything you want done for the rest of the time that Cardin, Portman, Neal, and Brady are around, go right ahead. Now, the only way you're going to get them to do stuff, the only way, it has to be, one, data driven, and two, it has to be bipartisan. You're not going to come in and get a bunch of Democrats yelling and screaming, or get a bunch of Republicans and yelling and screaming, or be ideological without data to back you up. You're just going to create enemies that you really don't want. Because it's when you tick off the nice people, that's a problem.
Yeah, and I would just add one last point on this, and it goes to what Paul was saying, and I do want to give Paul and his team credit. I mean, you guys have gotten a lot of your agenda included, and that's really amazing. And the fact that it's fundamentally bipartisan means it's evergreen, right? So, but I would say that the way that Brady and Chairman Neal did the auto enroll piece in 2.0 means they wrote it so that the small business industry would be on board, and I think that was a huge hurdle, frankly, to climb. Historically, they referred to it as a Band-Aid and opposed it left, right, and center. And the fact that that's in tells me that this is pretty buttoned up.
I do think the one thing that could happen is there are some groups who have not yet got some of the provisions they're interested in either package. So that is one area where they're going to have to do a lot of work and making sure it's bipartisan, that they've got all the stakeholder groups on board, and then finding champions, whether it's the sponsors themselves or other people on the committee to offer it up. So that's one area that could always, I do know of a few provisions that are out there that are still being worked on. But if they're done the right way, which I think, as NAGDA has done, which is making sure all the stakeholders are on board and it's bipartisan, then there's a chance that could get in there without controversy. But I agree. I think they're going to not want to open the floodgates on that kind of stuff.
All right. Well, I think we have time for maybe one last question, and really, it's regarding kind of the delay of certifying the election results, still the controversial over the election in general. How does this impact or delay the legislative process, and could this push out some actually action in 2021?
So let me start on that. I think there's two elements. I think, to me, it's not so much the delay, because when the Electoral College votes, when the House of Representatives votes, when January 20th comes, there'll be a new president. The question is, and there will be a shadow president, and the shadow president will be Shadow President Donald J. Trump. The question is, how big is that shadow? Where is he on the spectrum? Is it this huge shadow that overhangs the entire Republican Party, 70% of the Republican Party, 40% of the 20%? Like, I don't think we know yet until we see it. And the thing that could get in the way of bipartisan action, I believe, is if Donald Trump has an outsized voice with a goal of hemming in Republicans from working with Biden, and as he tries to delegitimize the Biden presidency. That's the biggest concern for mine. To the extent that he is not as interested in the day-to-day legislative operations, I think people will be free, or doesn't have that power, I think they'll be more free. But I think it's a mixed bag. I don't think it's too early to tell in my book. I mean, maybe it's all about January 5th and the Georgia primary. Once that's over, people are free. I don't know, but it could be a situation where you have someone out of office who has an influence, and depending on how he wants to use it, he could tie up some people who are more interested in his approval, because that it's not just his approval, it's his voters' approval. So if you have people like Hawley in Missouri, Cotton in Arkansas, Cruz in Texas, potential 2024 folks who are really going to want to tie themselves to Trump going forward, does it just extend to those people, or does it extend beyond them? So that's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add, and I don't know if any of you saw, there was a piece over the weekend in the Washington Post about the number of Republicans who refused to admit the election results, the outcome, right? And I think Andy had a lot of great points, but I worry about credibility, and I worry about the relationships among the rank and file members. The partisanship this fall was like palpable. I mean, it was so intense. And I think a lot of it stemmed from the White House and the tone and tenor coming from there. But I just, we also have another really large freshman class coming in. And as as anyone who's worked in Washington, the relationships among these members are so important, right? It's like I said, Rob Portman walking across the Capitol to sit down with Richie Neal because they're longtime friends, right? They want to get things done together. So I agree with what Andy said in terms of the amount of influence that Trump will continue to have over the party. But I also feel like there have been a number of Republicans who privately have said, you know what, having him leave the White House, but Republicans maintaining the Senate was really our dream scenario. They're not going to say that to the Washington Post when they're reporting on a piece like that, because Post is trying to get a headline. But, you know, and I think media is going to play, sorry, I know we're running out of time, but media is going to play a really important role, you know. And another thing is there was a day last week where there was nothing about President Trump on the front page of the New York Times. So the more days that go by that we see that, the smaller his influence and role is. And I think that then there are enough people here in town who want to see something get done.
Well, I think that gets us to the hour. So thank you, Reagan. I want to just personally thank all of our panelists today, and thank you to the audience for joining. I hope you found this as informative as I did. And we would greatly appreciate if you took a moment to complete the short evaluation as you exit the webinar. Have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you all and hope to see you soon.